I spent 3 days looking for this little piece of mother of pearl. I have gone through just the back alley trenches of my garage and all my containers of things like this, of guitar parts and stuff. My buddy Mike has tasked me with making a custom Squier P bass for his dad as a Christmas gift. His dad is a Pentecostal and he is also in the military, in the Navy. We're going to try to use a couple of those elements in the bass, and this little guy is going to become a Dove inlay. So let's get drawing and then we'll get to work. Alright, so this is the bass we're going to be working on, guys. Just a pretty standard Fender Precision bass. We're going to be changing these pickups out, so we're going to be putting on the vintage style covers, which we might do an engraving on one of the covers, we'll see. And more importantly, we're going to be putting that inlay in right here. Alright, switch to narration mode. So the first thing I did was draw a whole bunch of these just to find a shape I liked, and I used the mother of pearl as a template for my little drawings here. Once I get the one I like, I go ahead and glue it on to the mother of pearl. That way it doesn't slide around as I'm cutting. Now the cutting takes quite a bit of time. A lot of people do this stuff by machine these days. I'm not a rich man, so doing it by hand, and I like to do the little things like this by hand. Gives it that personal touch, and it's this type of work always kind of, I feel like, balances me out, if that makes any sense. I know a lot of you guys out there are DIYers too, so you know what I'm talking about. The blades do tend to break though, it just happens with these ultra small blades. So here we are, good bit of time later, little birdie is all cut out. Now the paper is still glued on. You can see how small he is compared to my finger there. The paper is still glued on, so we'll have to get that off. First though, I am scoring the path of the wing onto the mother of pearl. I don't want to lose that. That's a detail that'll be there later. I'm just sanding the top of it to get the paper off. There we go, all cleaned up. Okay, so I'm pulling out 4 or 5 frets just to make it a little easier to run the Dremel through here later and just do all the carving we need to do. Now that I've got them all laid out in exactly where I want them, we're going to glue him in place. A little tiny dot of glue. Do not use very much because you can break your shell trying to get it off of there. So just a little tiny bit of super glue, and that'll hold him right where you want him. Now that he's in place, we're going to go ahead and trace around it with a mechanical pencil. If you thin the lead out of the mechanical pencil a little bit, you can get a really close line up against the shell, up against your cutout. And now I'm just scoring where I put the pencil in with a razor blade. That will help grain break out later. You can see those score marks right here. And you don't worry about the glue because all that's getting cut out anyway. Taking a little detour here, we're going to replace the stock pickups with some really nice Seymour Duncan Basslines pickups. The set I got, for whatever reason, did not have wires, so I'm just going to swap them out for the stock wires. It should work just fine. It's about as basic a pickup install as you can do. Of course, as always, be careful not to overheat. Alright, that should be the last connection, this little white wire here. There we go. I've put the foam on the back of them now so they can go into their new home. Little base here. And we'll get them all adjusted into the right spot once we get the strings on. Now we got these covers, little metal covers, that are basically off vintage P basses. They don't really come with these anymore, but talking to Mike, his dad likes the old school stuff, and so do I. I think it looks cool. So we will be installing these after we get the strings on so that we can line everything up. So back to the inlay now. We're using the Dremel. It's very hard to film this, so I just filmed a little bit of it. But we're basically removing the bulk of the material out of the cutout for the inlay with the Dremel. And I'm using a little diamond bit to get as close as I can to the edge, and then I'll use a razor, like you see me doing here, to just clean up the edge. Now that I know the inlay fits after some testing, we've gone ahead and put a little glue in there, and we're going to get him seated. Just like that. And now I am marking out these spots I need to drill to put in some 2mm dots, which are sort of a religious reference. It's basically like a clock face. If you look at it that way, they're going to represent Psalm 55:6. Which you guys, if you're Google savvy, can look that up and it'll make sense. And these guys are set in place and glued in. And I'm using the drill bit to get a little round indentation so that when I put the blackened glue on top, it will fill in the eye hole and you'll be able to see it. And you'll see me rescore the wings a few times because I don't want to lose that when I sand. So now we're getting it level to the board. I am being as careful as possible to not touch the board unless I have to, because I'm going through quite a few grits here and I don't want to lose the radius. That's very important. Alright, once that's all finished, I'm using a mixture of rosewood dust, a little bit of black dye, and glue to go over top the inlay, and that's going to fill in the little cracks and the little any indentations left around the inlay. Once that dries, I'm just shaving it off with a razor and scraping. Always sanding and scraping, working with guitars. So once the bulk of the material is removed, we're going to level sand just a little bit more. Go through some finer grits. Again, being careful of the radius and using our fingers to feel more than to how it looks. We want to get the feel right. And then using the Dremel, we're going to go ahead and polish it up. And that's a step I've seen people miss. These inlays really come alive when you polish them. I guess the shell is very hard, so when you polish them, you can really see the incandescence of the shell. It's just very, very pretty. The only thing I'm doing here is just cleaning out the fret slots. Now we are seating the frets back in place. A little bit of super glue on the end of each tang to hold it down. Polishing the frets. You guys have seen me do this several times, going through a few different grits and then hitting it with the Dremel. It's the standard Opera Pro thing to do. And oiling the fretboard, because again, it really brings out the contrast of the white inlay. Now we are figuring out the position for this pickup cover. We want it to be perpendicular to the strings, but it also has to be perfectly centered so that the pickups don't hang out either side of it. Alright, getting that tightened down and put in place. Alright guys, so sometimes being a guitar tech is more about being resourceful than it is actually doing the work, because on this bass we needed a piece engraved. We had talked about doing an anchor engraving since Mike's dad used to be in the Navy, and I could do it. You know, I got my diamond bit engraving kit and things like that, but it would have added quite a bit to the cost, and being cost conscientious is part of what I do. I try to provide the best service I can for people for the cheapest price. So what we did, there's this little store in the mall. Sorry, there's cars coming by. There's this little store in the mall called Things Remembered, and they even packaged it in this little case, even though it's kind of funny because it's a piece I brought them right here. Even put it in this nice little baggy thingy. So for less than 20 bucks, I got this little anchor put on the ashtray cover, which the old ashtray on the vintage basses, you know what that's about, the little bridge cover. So they put this on. Let me see if I can show you that. It's really hard to see, but you can see there's an anchor in there. We wanted it to be understated a little bit because his dad's not super fancy. Oh look, I'm a fish guy. So let's see if we can get a better look at it. Okay, there we go. That's a decent shot. So I would have done a little bit more fancy work to it probably, but at least this is really clean, was cheap, and with a 24-hour turnaround, you can't argue. So I think that was the way to go. It saved him money, it saved me time, and let's go get this guy put on the bass. And we're just drilling again. Once we get the bridge all set where we want it, put the screws in, tighten it down, and it just adds that classic touch. Alright guys, alright everyone, here we have the finished bass. You see it's an Affinity Squier P bass. Fret's looking good, setup's feeling great. A little birdie at the 12th fret, looks good. And there's actually a significance behind where the dots are placed, but that's personal to them, so we won't get into that. The machine at Things Remembered at the mall did a good job getting that little subtle anchor on there. And that's what this build was about being subtle but personal. So the dove reflects, of course, his religious nature, and the anchor, his service in the U.S. Navy. So I think it came out looking good. I love the vintage covers for a Squier P bass. You know, the Seymour Duncans, it sounds great, it plays great, it looks great. So I think he's going to be happy with it. And I think Mike, my buddy who I did this for, is going to be happy as well. So thank you for watching everyone and joining me for another customization video, and I will see you guys soon.